The DA is calling on Parliament to suspend the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. The party says Mkhuleko Hlengwa was disrespectful towards Eskom board member, Busisiwe Mavuso, during that heated exchange in a Scopa meeting last week. Now, Hlengwa locked horns with Mavuso after she said that the board will not be, quote, the fall guy for the ANC's failings, which ultimately led to Eskom's demise. For more on the opposition's response to that moment, let's speak to DA Chief Whip Natasha Mazzone, who joins us now via our telephone line. And it's great to see you or hear from you or be with you, Natasha. Thanks very much indeed for making time. So much has been said about what actually took place at that meeting. Hlengwa himself has been on this channel saying he actually agrees with what Busisiwe Mavuso said. He just believes she raised it in the wrong platform. With that in mind, why are you saying he should be suspended?
Well, you know, Parliament's a very interesting beast in the way it works, because our parliamentary portfolio committees work in such a way that the only place that you can really go and blow the whistle and tell the truth and bring problems that are happening in your area to the fore in a safe environment is at the Scopa committee. And if you cannot come to Parliament, and especially to Scopa, and tell the truth and tell your side of the story and tell what's actually happening in your entity to the members of Parliament, then where can you do it? So this woman comes to Parliament, Miss Mavuso. She's brave enough, and I must say it takes guts to talk truth to power, and she's brave enough to tell members of Parliament that she is now sitting and dealing with a board that's dealing with problems that weren't caused by her, that were caused by predecessors, thanks to the ANC placing these predecessors in these positions, which we all know is true. We all know about cadre deployment and state capture. And she gets thrown out of Parliament for telling the truth. She was in no way rude. She was robust because she kept getting interrupted, which we all know is terribly irritating when you're trying to explain the stance. And the members of Scopa tell me that it all happened so quickly and it was such a blur that no one has ever been thrown out of Scopa. It's unheard of. Scopa is where whistleblowers and those who know the real truth come to tell Parliament what the problem is. That's what Scopa is. It's the oversight mechanism of Parliament on public accounts. And if you can't come and tell Scopa what the problem is, then there's absolutely nowhere for Scopa for people to do it.
Yeah.
Now here's where the problem comes in. If this is the way a member of the public who is brave enough to speak out about her opinion, and she's asked her opinion and she gives it and she gets thrown out of Parliament, it means that no one will ever come to Parliament and feel safe enough to tell the truth.
Right.
And then we're going to have things like the Gupta leaked emails where no one felt safe enough to come out openly and say, this is the problem, here it is. And MPs are going to have to do deep dives into these things and find out if there's truth to the matter. There we had the entire Eskom board. And I mean, if she was wrong, certainly the Eskom board would have stepped in and said, look, we're going to have a little chat outside, or we're going to have a little caucus outside, because they know when there's trouble. But Andre de Ruyter has made it very clear that there is a huge problem at Eskom that needs to be addressed. But it's also not fair to put the entire blame on the board as it currently sits, which is a new board. And we must know the history that has caused the crisis that we're currently in.
Right.
So, I mean, to throw someone out of Parliament, I mean, in my experience, and I've been in Parliament since 2009, we've only ever thrown an entity out once, which was Denel, because the board came and refused to give us information. So we said, fine, goodbye, and off they went.
Sure.
Here's someone who's willing to whistleblow and gets thrown out of Parliament.
Let me come in there, Natasha. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think some people may push back against that and say she wasn't thrown out. She was given the option to leave and she took it, right? But I guess that's your own way of interpreting how that moment actually unfolded. But again, the contention here is not actually what Busisiwe Mavuso was saying. In fact, even Mkhuleko Hlengwa agrees that it is the ANC and the skullduggery that took place at the top echelons of the party that effectively led to Eskom being in the kind of malaise that it's currently in. What Mkhuleko Hlengwa was actually pointing out is that the issues around the politics, for instance, that led to Eskom's demise shouldn't be raised in an apolitical forum like a Scopa meeting, where quite frankly no one is batting for any kind of political party. But more than that, there were actually 23 recommendations that were put forward to this Eskom board, and they were asked to explain why only 9 of those 23 recommendations had been fulfilled. Essentially what Mkhuleko Hlengwa was getting at is this wasn't about addressing issues in the room, as it were. He is of the view that Busisiwe Mavuso was addressing issues, yes, that have their place, but that place wasn't that meeting.
Well, unfortunately in Parliament, there's nowhere else to raise those issues. You can't raise them at the Public Enterprise Committee, because Public Enterprises Committee will have a Denel or a Transnet, and I've been on that. I was on that committee for 9 years, so there's no way to raise it there. You can't raise it at the Energy Committee, because energy deals with renewables, with clean energy, all of that kind of issue. The only place for her to have raised that particular issue is at Scopa. So when you're explaining why you're reaching 9 of your 23 targets, and some of them are simply unreachable because of what's happened in the past, you have to be able to give them the chance to explain yourself. And if that brings politics into it, well, unfortunately, politics are highly involved in why Eskom is not working today. It's highly involved in why our public enterprises are falling apart. So it's not an issue where you can separate politics from the issue at hand. And that's what she was trying to explain at the time. And all hell broke loose.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can say she was asked to leave, but I mean, if you're asked to leave and you asked, kicked out, it's pretty much the same thing. I certainly wouldn't sit in a committee where they said, well, would you like to leave? Well, quite frankly, if you won't listen to me, yes, I will leave. I'll leave and I'll go to the media and I'll tell the media my story, because at least they'll print what the truth is and why things are happening. But that should never happen in Parliament. Parliament is supposed to be a safe place where you come to meet the people on your committee, and you come and you give them the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And you must remember that when people testify in Parliament, if you lie to Parliament, it's akin to lying to court. So you're under oath.
Mm-hmm.
So she was under oath to tell that committee exactly why things had gone wrong and what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
So she stood up to tell her story, and she was stopped from telling the story that we all needed to hear.
Sure. So I think there's 2 main parts that come out of what people are reading into that moment, right? There's the substantive issues in the form of what was actually said, the content from both parties' mouths, and there's also how the matter itself was handled. Let's speak about the latter if we can, and I think it's in that world, with how it was handled, that Mkhuleko Hlengwa perhaps does have a lot of criticism leveled against him. I mean, for instance, as Busisiwe Mavuso was walking out, she described her behavior as, politics of the gutter. There's something to be said about that, handling moments of deep disagreements, especially with the chair of a committee like Scopa.
Absolutely. You have to have complete control of your meeting. You have to have complete respect whether you disagree or you have an issue with the person that you're you're interrogating in Scopa. And the behavior was I certainly don't remember Themba Gordy ever calling anyone politics of the gutter or, quite frankly, any head of Scopa mentioning something like that. You can imagine how humiliating it was for her. She's in a male-dominated environment. She's a woman who stood up and said something that I doubt many men would have had the guts to say. So there's that to take into account too. Her on her own was asked to leave, not the rest of the board, which in and of itself is deeply embarrassing. And I think the control of the meeting went completely sideways. And, when you lose control of a meeting and you let your personal anger and your personal political feelings come into it, that's where it goes very wrong. It's also, as you said, supposed to be a very independent committee. So for someone to say it's politics of the gutter is not an independent thought, because our thoughts in South Africa, especially our political thoughts, have been fought very hard for, that we can have these independent political thoughts. And I think that the manner in which she was asked to leave was absolutely unacceptable, unbecoming of a member of parliament, and certainly unbecoming of a chairperson. Now, on a personal level, I happen to like Hlengwa. We are, we greet each other in the corridor with a hug and a how's the family. We had that kind of relationship. And I'm quite shocked by the behavior, which led me to ask the question. I asked a series of questions to the speaker, one of them being, was there a meeting with the ANC with Hlengwa prior to this particular meeting with the Eskom board? Because there was obvious bias in protecting the ANC members of the committee, and certainly in protecting the ANC.
Sure.
And I can tell you for a fact, if she had said the DA had messed up in Tshwane or in Gauteng, she would have been allowed to explain herself a lot more than she would have had she said the ANC is the cause of the problems that we face at Eskom.
Right.
And that I think many people would agree with me on.
Sure. Yeah, right. That's the perception, the stance of the official opposition. Natasha Mazzone is the DA's chief whip in Parliament. Natasha, thanks very much indeed for your time.